Good afternoon, everyone. I think we are going to make a start. I know our colleagues from Glasgow just arrived, and some of them are eating very quickly, and they'll join us in a couple of minutes, but it's okay. But I'll just invite first Dr. Jamil, one of our trustees, to welcome you on behalf of the Migrant Voice Board. Thank you.
Oh, this is really wonderful. Our distinguished guests, panelists, fellow members of Migrant Voice, and delegates from the 3 voice networks in London, Glasgow, and Birmingham, a very good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Migrant Voice, I have a great pleasure to welcome you most cordially at our 4th annual conference. In particular, I wish to warmly welcome our guests from the Czech Republic, Spain, and Italy, who honored us by coming to share with us their wealth of experience and strengthening our mutual cooperation. I'm also pleased to see so many of you here to participate in our discussions, share with us your knowledge, ideas, and expertise, and support the great work of our young but very vibrant organization. As you will find from the conference program, we have 2 exciting days ahead of us. This is because this year's conference takes a different shape in terms of its objectives and in light of the time it is being held. Less than a year to the general elections. We are planning to focus our discussions on practical issues that will result in concrete outcomes. We are also looking forward to use these recommendations, ideas, contributions throughout today and tomorrow to achieve more success and take Migrant Voice towards new horizons. Your strong support and active participation are greatly appreciated. It's also important to mention that our conference is taking place at a time when Operation Synergy is being revitalized again. People from certain communities are being nowadays surrounded for deportation. This is really worrying for me personally. I would also like to thank Amnesty International for hosting our conference and for their continuous support for Migrant Voice. I wish you all very productive conference and enjoyable deliberations through today and tomorrow. I will now hand over to Nazik Ramadan, the director of Migrant Voice, who will present the keynote speech. But before that, I want to say once more that it is a pleasure to see you all here. Thank you, and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll try to make it brief because our panelists are waiting, and we already started a little bit late. My name is Nazik, and I'm the director of Migrant Voice. I want to again welcome everyone and thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome all our guests from all the cities, from Glasgow, Birmingham, Manchester, Sheffield, Liverpool, Brighton, and London, of course. Okay. Also, welcome again to our guests from Europe, our partners from the Czech Republic, from Spain, from Italy. Okay. And we might have some guests from Malta. They're not here yet. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I also like to start by thanking everyone at Migrant Voice, thanking my colleagues, thanking the trustees, the Board of Trustees of Migrant Voice for being a brilliant team, and for all the volunteers who made this possible. Also, maybe a quick thank to our funders who also made this possible. So thank you so much. As you could see on the wall, there's a hashtag. So the hashtag, if you are tweeting from this event, is MVConf14. And also, we need, I hope you have familiarized yourself with health and safety, with the fire exits and bathrooms and everything. We are also filming. Two of the sessions today are, we're doing live webcasting. And there'll be people taking photos and videos around the room. Please let us know if you have a problem with that. So today, again, welcome again. Why we're here today? This is our fourth annual conference. Just over 4 years ago, we set up what looked like a movement, a migrant-led movement organization by ordinary people who actually were concerned about the tone of the debate on migration and about the absence of migrant voices from that debate. So we set up the organization. We also worried about the impact of all that debate and our absence of our voices from this debate. But since then, migration as an issue was here to stay, hasn't gone away. And as we've seen from the recent European elections, that we have a number of challenges to face. And then again, our concern is the impact of the debates on the mainstream parties and their policies. And recently, you've seen one of those policies, the immigration bill, and also another one, the family migration rules. Well, we could describe them as very hostile, and even the immigration bill, we can safely describe it as one of the most racist policies this country produced. We're worried because now, and this is not just a UK issue, this is a European issue. We're worried about the political gains for 9 of the far-right parties in Europe. So we have a lot to do. Our concern is, as I said, is shared by our European partners, and this is why we're delighted today to have our partners from Czech Republic, Spain, and Italy. We work together on a project because all of us, this was a real cause for concern for us, and we decided to get together and to develop a project where we try to bring migrants with the host communities. So we build understanding, and people meet each other and talk to each other and stop seeing each other as a threat. We worked on a project called Face to Face, which you will hear about after this session. We had one goal in mind, one aim is to turn the them and us into all of us. It was very important that we all work together. So we're here today again to learn and to plan our activities together. I was also meant today to launch our latest research on the media representation of migrants. I'm afraid if you're tweeting, maybe not tweet this part. We'll be launching this research formally next week, during the week, to the media. So, but I'm happy to share with you some of the early findings from this research. Again, I mean, as we all know, the debate on migration takes place largely within the media, and yet migrants themselves are absent from that debate, and our research confirmed this. So our volunteers, an army of volunteers, spent 11 weeks looking at 8 different online media, some of the main ones like The Times, The Guardian, ITV, The Mail, Sky News, etc., and the BBC. So, and they looked at around 600 stories on migration during this period of time to see the level of representation, to see how many migrants are quoted in a story about migration, about their issues. And of course, it was no surprise to us that the overall, what we find out, again, these are early findings, so please don't tweet about them. Next week, you'll have the full one. We discovered only 12, actually, the percentage of migrant voices in stories about migration is, the average is 12%. So this is, again, an issue for us. I'm happy to share other findings that The Times has the lowest percentage of migrants quoted in their stories about migration, and only 6% the percentage. Now, ITV and Sky News, they both tied, having the highest percentage with 17% of the people quoted are migrants. But again, that's why I said it's early, don't tweet, because ITV didn't do too many stories, but with this small number of stories they did, they had a larger percentage of people talking. So again, I would be careful at this stage to make any conclusions. But what was clear in all the media outlets we looked at, that all of them included, were more likely to quote politicians, academics, and other experts rather than migrants talking about migration issues. I mean, this would not be thinkable, would be unthinkable if the media was talking about issues to do with the women or with people with disability. they wouldn't write a story without having those, affected involved. So this just tells us that we really have a lot to do. We need to work more, and we need to work with the media to make sure that our voices are also heard. This is, again, as our trustee said, it's important, just less than a year between now and the next general election, and we really need to be ready. And as you can see, I mean, as I said, immigration is not going anywhere. So, I guess that's why we're here today as well. The program for the day, you all have a program. We're going to start in a minute with the immigration debate session. And as I mentioned, some of the sessions are being webcasted live. And at the back, there's a photo exhibition. So during the breaks, make sure you go and have a look at some of the photos from the 4 countries from the face-to-face project, which we'll launch in the result today. I also would like to remind you to put your mobile phone on silence. I think I did mine, yeah. And to please try to stick to the time and come back after the breaks if we give you time. So, because we have a lot to achieve. Most importantly, would like you to participate, engage, and enjoy the day. Enjoy the day. Also, one last maybe request from me is, this is a place where it's a safe place for us to present our views, and you may hear views that you don't agree with, but you are right to challenge those views respectively, because listening is also an important part of a conversation, any conversation. And I think maybe that's it from me, but before I pass you to Simon Israel from Channel 4 to chair this session, to conclude my presentation, also to present to you very briefly Migrant Voice position. We sought the help of one of our allies, Ban Ki-moon, who actually will hear him now, summing up Migrant Voice position on migration.
Migration should be a journey of hope, not a perilous game in which migrants and their family members risk their lives and livelihoods. We must always stay true to universal values and not allow opportunities to divide societies by exploiting fear and hatred for political gains. Especially in time of high unemployment, we must be vigilant against the tendency to scapegoating migrants.
Thank you, Nazar. For those of you who may not know me or may not even watch Channel 4 News, I'm Simon Israel. I'm the Home Affairs correspondent there. And I've been invited, I have the honour of being invited to chair the next hour in a question time style debate with the panel of 5 guests that Migrant Voice have invited today to take part in a discussion. Basically, the title is Migration, What's All the Fuss About? But having viewed some of the questions that have been submitted, I can see we're going to go all over the place looking at various different views. Can I introduce the panel to start with? On my far left is Sophie Taylor, and next to her is Philippe, then Kiri, and on my left, your right, is Harriet, and then there is Wilf Sullivan on my far left. They are the panel, and it was wise not to get them to stand up and introduce themselves for 2 or 3 minutes, because it would just drag on, and we can get started as soon as possible. Their biographies and all the information about them you can see and read in the pack. But before we start the debate, I would like you to watch a film, very short film, that was done today, I believe today, of people's opinions on the street, which should never be ignored.
Pretty much my childhood was marked with racial prejudice. Going to school, primary school as it were, I didn't know any different. Thought, okay, predominantly white school again. A lot of the children were from working class backgrounds. So I was the kid that just didn't fit in any particular box. I was neither African to them, neither South Asian, but neither Arab either. So, I was called a myriad of names, anything from being a nigger, a Paki, or towards the end, a dirty Arab. So, you would be told to go back home. And instantly I was thinking, home's 5 minutes away. That was for a good, 12 years of my life. So yeah, I enjoyed that for pretty much 12 years. Going on to secondary school, there are a lot more children from African backgrounds. So you think, okay, I'm going to be accepted here. This is going to be fun. It will be a very different experience. But the same challenges existed, but very different types of challenges. And those challenges were, actually, you're African, yes, but you don't look typically African. Okay, so the kids who were from African backgrounds were predominantly West African, and they didn't sort of understand the East African look, or they weren't accepting of anything different to what they were used to. So again, it was, you refugees go home.
I'm not necessarily been subject to any racial prejudice of late or since my late teens. It was only early May when my friend called me frantically and said, guess what's just happened? I saw this guy beating up his girlfriend. And I said, oh, okay, so that's fine. And she goes, well, I turned the corner thinking, okay, I'm going to call the police. But as I was about to do so, it's almost like he followed me. And she goes, behind me, he started shouting, you niggers go home. You niggers are multiplying like vermin. Whilst it surprises me that we're having to hear the term nigger, I didn't feel shocked, and I didn't feel appalled. So I wonder whether it's because we're bombarded by so many stories where migrants are vilified. I wonder whether somehow I've picked up on subliminal messages that say, actually, it's okay to be marked out as different because you're not at home. And that is the treatment somehow that you should expect on rare occasions. And that's unfortunate that I should have been feeling that way.
Actually, there has always been an awful lot of racism, but people have been able, because of the rise of groups like UKIP, to express it.
When I came here in the 60s, things were different, Times have changed completely. When you go on the bus now, on the underground, England seems to be a brighter place now, a more colourful place than it was when I first came. It was all black and white. The colours have changed,
Yeah. People have become against the government because they're not controlling the situation. But then it's all chaos, so that's what they want. So yeah.
Even with people who have migrated from another country themselves, they're still, once they settle, they think, yeah, we're British now, and then they forgot where they're coming from, and the new migrants that are coming in, they react a certain way, which I find quite distasteful, and I'm thinking, but you're a migrant yourself.
It can bring a lot of problems, a lot of anxiety, especially with the English people. It gets really frightening. On the other hand, it's okay.
Lots of variety in culture.
Absolutely, yeah.
I suppose people are scared of the unknown. There's still lots of racial attitudes in society that are pretty prevalent, and that might dictate what people vote for in politics. Yeah.
I'm an immigrant. Basically, you meet a lot of people in this country, and you get exposed to a lot of different things you wouldn't find in most places. If I was possibly in my own country, with the lack of diversity there, I would not be able to be exposed to a lot of different ideas.
I think the whole thing is inevitable. The world's getting smaller. I'm from Manchester in the UK. Okay, there would have been a time when it would have been unusual for me to marry someone from London, because that was just such a big distance. People didn't make those kind of journeys.
Yeah.
Now, to fly from here to Serbia, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So it's just going to happen.
Yeah.
There's going to be more migration, and if you don't like it, it's just going to happen. It's just going to be a fact of life.
Recession seems to be someplace. As the recession gets worse, people coming in get more talked about. It's all related because of people's perception of no jobs, but there is jobs. It's perception.
They're a flash in the pan, I think. UKIP is a non-starter. There is no hope. And any organisation relies upon race. Racial bigotry is never going to be successful. Not in this country.
Because of the publicity it receives from right-wing press. Well, because of the context of difficult economic times, the idea of a scapegoat, it's all too easy, isn't it? It's too simplified, but it seems to make a lot of sense.
For hundreds of thousands of years, people moved all over the world. I don't know, maybe it's always been talked about, but just because we've got things like Facebook and the news and 24-hour news and all the rest of it, we just talk about it more. But surely these things have happened for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's why I don't really understand why people kick up such a fuss.
One is I think a lot of people try to talk about it as a debate. It's not a debate, because actually what you get in the mainstream is the same views across virtually across the political spectrum, and those views are based on, as far as I can see, Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech about numbers. The lower numbers you have, the better race relations you have, and the more numbers, the more problems there are. Secondly, I think it's on that basis, it's a debate. It's the same old debate about racism and xenophobia that there's always been. I mean, I've got to say, I was born here. I get deja vu now. It now feels like it did in the 1960s and 70s when I was growing up. That actually, if you don't fit in, then if you're not perceived to be the majority, then you're an alien.
Right. So you don't think recession and economic situation plays a big part?
I think there are obviously factors in terms of that framework for what's called a debate, and when you have recessions, then those issues come more to the fore. But I mean, I don't think that actually the debates that were taking place in the 1960s and 70s and 80s about immigration were ever resolved in this country.
Okay. Kiri, do you think nothing's changed?
Since the 1960s
and 70s?
Wow. That's a hard one. I don't know. Let's just say I wasn't here then. I'm a recent migrant. But from what I understand, some people say that it's improved in terms of overt racism, but some of the messages that we heard back then are coming back. I think it has improved. I think we've got to say, I think it has improved, but at the same time, I think we've also become a little bit more blind to how racism also evolves. There seems to be this idea that unless it's a caricature of, and this does actually still happen, people being beaten up, slogans daubed on walls, and I'm not saying that doesn't still happen, but racism is also insidious. It can also be institutional. It can also be embedded in messages, and there's a lot of dog whistling around at the moment, and it almost seems that unless someone says the N-word or anything else, that it's not called racism. We have lots of debates about, is that actually racist, isn't it? It's almost like unless it's this big caricature, that we can't spot it anymore. But as to the first question as well,
doesn't that depend on who uses it? Since it was used in the film, I didn't hear an enormous gasp from the audience.
As in whether a black person uses it as opposed to a white person?
I'm asking.
It depends on context. I think, one thing that people often say is that obviously you hear it in rap music, if we're just going to talk about the word nigger. But it depends on how it's used. And it doesn't always have to be that word to make you feel unwelcome. Since I've been here, and I've only been here 11 years, so that's not that long, but I have noticed a change in the media discourse and coded language, which we don't acknowledge being as coded as it is.
I think it is about economics, and I think it's about class. Migration is great for somebody from my background. If you're middle class, you love migration because suddenly you are able to afford all those kind of service industries which you couldn't afford before. You can have gardeners, you can have nannies, you can have all these kind of things. London is a much more vibrant and lively city than when I was growing up here in the 70s. It's changed beyond recognition for the better. But my views have been very much shaped by the work I've done. In particular, I write think tank reports, and for the last one, I did a report on why Black, Caribbean and white working class boys are failing. And when I do a report, I like to spend about a year interviewing people, doing the research. And during that time, I met this gang of boys, black boys from West Norwood in Brixton. And I became very fond of them, and 5 years later was still very close indeed. And I thought I was going to change their life. In fact, they changed my life completely. And when you're talking about, earlier the lady was saying about the absence of the migrant voice, well, I can tell you there's no one more absent from this debate than the white working class boy and the black Caribbean boy, the children of migrants who are here and who find themselves very much sidelined by migration. They find themselves in competition with very bright, young migrants determined to succeed. And they are sidelined. I mean, this is economic. They are sidelined. So whereas I'm benefiting from migration, they are sidelined to a lifetime of benefits, and in the case of my gang, 2 of them, prison. So I think it's a very different issue in this country, depending from which class you come from.
How does migration sideline the people you talk about?
Because, I have to say I'm very much putting their views here. This is what they say to me. And whether they're white working class from somewhere like Hastings or they're black and from somewhere like West Norwood, they say very similar things to me. Unfortunately, our state school system for them, for these boys, mostly on free school meals, fails them. 1 out of 5 at the age of 14 can barely read and write. And 1 out of 3 can barely read and write. One under 5 out is a reading age of somebody under 10. So they find themselves, and I think there's been many surveys that I'm sure everybody here is familiar with, to show that migrants coming to this country have a high level of education. Now, if you're me or you, and you're faced with one of my boys, and you're faced with a Pole who's, wants to work, has been to university, to find someone who can barely read and write, has a problem meeting your eye, you know who you're going to employ. So these kids are suffering.
Okay. Can I go to, thank you for that. Can I go to the first question? I think it's Joy.
Can I quickly respond to that?
You can, if you wish.
Yeah. I think it's very strange to blame the migrant when you've just identified the problem as a state school system which fails to educate people.
No, I agree, but it's the two things together.
And secondly, and I'm not saying this is true of you, but I also find it very funny when suddenly Tories express concern for working class kids, which they never express in any other context except when you can blame the migrant for it.
Excuse me, who said I was a Tory?
I said it wasn't true of you. I said.
All right, okay.
I said in other
Can
cases.
we move on to the first question? I think it's Joy. It may be Jay, but I think Elliot Bowman. Oh, hello. There's a microphone around, I hope. Can you please? It is Joy. Yes. You don't look like a J.
So I'm Joy Elliott from the National Union of Students.
Right.
One of the things that we're facing.
I think, is the microphone working? Because I'm worried that people at the back might not be able to hear.
Does this one work? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Joy Elliott Bowman from the National Union of Students. This is something that we've been encountering a lot. How do you propose, within the rhetoric that's existing around migration, that we challenge and stop the way that one group of migrants is pitted against another, as if one has more rights or value to society than another group? So skilled versus unskilled, students versus refugees. It's not a particularly helpful debate. How do we challenge that?
Wolf. Something that the TC are trying to think about at the moment, actually. I mean, we're just about to, working with Migrant Voice, to start a sort of what we call a migration messaging project in three towns in this country. Well, one of the things that we think is that you have to try and change the nature of the conversation, because our belief is that a lot of the things that talked about in terms of migration are actually almost like proxy debates. You know, people talk about migrants taking their jobs. They don't talk about what's happening to jobs. People talk about the pressure on migrants cause on public services, but that means that they're not talking about what's actually happening to public services. So one of the things that we want to look at doing is trying to sort of develop messages which say, well, actually, it's not migrants that are to blame, it's other things and other people that are to blame for what's happening in your community. And I think it's important, because I don't think that you can just try and change the debate by just going ahead on at the arguments that are made by people who are anti-migration at the moment, because in some weird way you just reinforce what they're saying all the time by saying, well, you know, when you talk about migrants, they're a problem. You know, so you have to find other ways. That's what we're going to do. Look for other ways of actually engaging.
How are you
in
going
this.
to do that?
Partly by developing new messages and trying them out through campaigns in local radio, newspapers, getting on board local influential people in the local community, and to try and see what effect that has.
Kiri?
I think part of the problem is because it's often portrayed as a zero-sum game, that, you know, one group if one group is doing better, it's at the expense of another. I think also politicians do that quite deliberately. We have that narrative of the desirable and the undesirable migrant. I think one important thing is for the migrant communities to stick together. Students, I think, should take up for refugees. We should not stay in the categories that we have been placed in, but unite, I think, and tackle the problem as a whole. I think in terms of how to do that, I mean, obviously, I think greater diversity in the media would help, more voices. But I do think that standing together and pushing in that way is really important to show that also people move between several categories in their life. I started as a student. I became a work permit holder. I went through almost every single visa category, to some people's horror. But just to show that, you know, you're not fixed, you're not defined by that category, you're not fixed in that category. We move through several, and that's just life. And standing together, yeah.
Harriet?
I'm not really sure I understand the question. I mean, I think that...
The question is, can you change the language, isn't it?
Oh, can you change the language?
Well,
sorry,
the question was, how do we stop the rhetoric?
Oh,
That's
sorry. I thought it was about talking about trying to divide the immigration community.
I think she said, how do you stop the rhetoric which compares one migrant group to another? That's the point, isn't it? How do you divide? How do you get round the problem of division created by the language that people use to play, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, one migrant group or one minority group off against another?
We often hear
yes.
You know, are great and refugees are bad. As students, we don't want that argument. How do we stop that from happening?
I don't know. I mean, my view is that there seems to be a huge emphasis, and this is referring back to my last point, that there seems to be a huge emphasis placed on the newly arrived migrant, but that everyone loses interest once they settle here, stay here, and they lose interest totally about their children. So I would be saying, well, perhaps we should turn the rhetoric more on the children's experience and what happens to them.
Okay. Sophie?
I found that a very interesting answer. We'll go back to your question. I think one of the things that, from my experience, is that everybody got to come up with the same message. What had happened is that if it's about migrant, we expect the migrant to fight their corner. If it's asylum seekers, we expect them to fight the corner. And technically, we don't. We should all get in the fight together. And, you know, I think it's really great when a white person stands up and says, I'm for migrant, they do this, they do that, they do this for us. And that's strengthened because that shows collectivism. And I think that is terribly useful. I'm just not clear, about second and third generation migrant. I'm afraid that my children are first, second generation, they're still considered as migrant. The color, the face, the things color us. I came to this country in 1973. I am a very old lady. And I am a naturalized citizen, etc. I am still constituted as a migrant. And the bottom line is that the once a migrant, always a migrant, and it shouldn't happen. Second and third generation are citizens in this country and should be respected as citizens. I'm a citizen. I deserve that respect. I deserve that support from my fellow citizen, regardless of color and national status.
Philip.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add much to what has been said before. I think you can't stop people saying that. People are always going to say that, and and there's a good reason for that, because divide and rule works. There are going to be some students who are going to say, well, I'm part of the good camp, and I'm very happy being part of the good camp, and therefore, why should I express solidarity or concern for the people in the bad camp? The limited way in which you can counteract it is you as students saying that you think that the contribution of other migrant groups to this society is just as valid as your own.
I'd like to throw it over. People in the audience are more, if you put your hand up, I'm more than happy to include, this is inclusive, not exclusive, just the panel and me talking. So if people want to engage, you just have to stick your hand up. May not go to everybody all at the same time if you like, but please feel free to put your hands up. Yes, sir, there is a, madam, you've got the microphone.
I've got the mic.
You better, off you
I
go.
don't know if you can hear me, but I've got the mic.
Can you introduce yourself for everybody else?
Okay, I'm Dori Chetty from the University of Westminster. I'm doing some research on migration, but perhaps some of the issue I'm concerned about is in the very wording. There's always the other, the migrant, and migrant itself is, I think to answer to Sophie, is an issue, how we see migrant, and perhaps as Nazek started by saying, is, when we are working all together collectively, the meaning of the word itself might not be so pejorative and used in that way.
You could hand the microphone to the chap. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Ratib Al-Sulaiman from British Syrian Education Centre. The migrant and refugee in the UK, they are very lucky here. They have access to housing, to education, to others. There is a 4 million Syrian refugee in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Jordan, in Turkey. There are 2 million of them, they have no access to education. They have no school for 3 years. They've been forgotten. And I would like to say to the migrants here and the refugee here, they might find like a little abuse or a little bit somebody doesn't like them or this. They can deal with it themselves because we are human beings. But those refugees, they have nothing. They've been forgotten for many, many years. And I think we should concentrate for these children and these women. They have no housing, they have no access, they live in tenants, and we should consider them as the real refugee. We are here very, very lucky. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that. Can I move on to another question? And this is from Stephanie Borkham. Yes, the lady in the middle here. Would you like to stand up?
Yeah.
It's easier for people to...
I wanted to know what all the panel members think about this new realism that's emerged recently among people who identify themselves as progressives. People like David Goodhart, who was here last year, the IPPR think tank people.
People on the panel?
No, actually. The people saying that NGOs who advocate for migrants' rights should not demand equal rights for migrants, and that such demands are counterproductive.
I didn't quite hear
Okay.
that. NGO.
Could you repeat that question just slightly louder so everyone...
Yeah. So to all the panel members, I wanted to know what they think about the new realism that has emerged recently among people who identify themselves as progressives. and I gave some examples like David Goodhart and the IPPR think tanks people, saying that NGOs who advocate for migrants' rights should not demand equal rights for migrants, and that such demands are counterproductive.
What do you mean by counterproductive?
That they will, well, to give an example, one kind of renowned academic is now saying that we ought to start considering trade-offs, so we should have less rights for migrants, and then the UK can become more open.
Right.
So.
Okay. Philip?
Well, I'm not sure David Goodhart is progressive. I would describe him as
Would you describe yourself as
I would describe him as reactionary myself. But, I mean, look, I mean, clearly, personally, I think that the commitment to equal rights ought to be sacrosanct. On the other hand, it is true that countries which don't grant equal rights to migrants tend to allow in more migrants because they don't have equal rights, and the Gulf countries, the Gulf states are an example of that. And you can see, for example, in the Emirates or Kuwait or Qatar, they have absolutely massive migrant populations because they do all the work that the Kuwaitis or local people don't want to do, and they know they can chuck them out whenever they want and pay them whatever they want and treat them as badly as they want. And arguably, the migrants who are there have made a choice to be there, and they're better off, they're happier being there than they are at home. At the same time, I don't think that's a compromise that I would want to make as a society as Britain, to say that I want to live in a society like that. Though, if you're a migrant who can't get into Britain otherwise, you might be willing to make that trade-off.
Harriet?
I think this is one of the reasons I feel so strongly about this issue, because I am absolutely passionate that once people are in this country, they have to be treated completely equally, and that we should be dying on the streets to make sure that that happens. And I worry because nobody knows how many people are coming in. I mean, I think that's what worries people, that's going to be sort of, that the more and more people, they think there's more and more people coming in so that they can be less and less accommodating and welcoming to migrants. And it's that attitude that I think I worry about, and why I hold my views is because of that. At the moment, I did actually looked at gang masters. I mean, at the moment, the way that was a very good, interesting point, just saying what happens in Kuwait and whatever. But that's going on in this country. I mean, there's people that are working for £2 or £3 an hour. There's a lot of incidents that I came across when I was writing my report on immigration, where you have with women, you have sex traffickers, where these women are being kept as virtual sex slaves. So this is already happening in this country, and it's because we're not being vigilant enough. So I think here I'm also find myself totally against this progressive views. We are not being vigilant, and we have to be much more so.
You mentioned in your first answer, if I remember rightly, the issue of class. Doesn't this go to the heart of class? That there should be different, or shouldn't be, different degrees of who has more rights, less rights, and so on. Which is, I think, what this argument is about, isn't it?
Well, we should all have. We are living in a country where we believe in equal rights. I mean, this is what this country is about, and this is why many migrants come here. I spent about 10 or 15 years living in the third world. So I know what is the attraction, and one of the biggest attractions is having a safe society where you're not going to be, where the police are relatively uncorrupt. I mean, I had to change my mind rather about that, but anyway, and where you do have some belief in the rule of law. And this is what we should be fighting to keep, whatever class you are.
Right. So they should have equal rights.
Yes.
And they should. And people should be campaigning for equal rights, and it's not counterproductive. Is that right?
I think we should not campaigning. We should be, marching in the streets for equal rights. I mean, once we start saying, well, anyone can come in, but they can't have equal rights, how can we possibly live in a country like that?
Kiri?
I have to say I agree very, very much with Harriet on that one. Migrants' rights are human rights as far as I'm concerned, and I think I understand what people are saying when they talk about being counterproductive, but we have to think about how it leads to a slippery slope. A lot of migrants are workers. Once you accept an underclass, people having less rights, to think that that would just stay there and not gradually erode the workers' rights of indigenous citizens, that is, I think it's a fallacy. The only people that benefit are big business, and believe me, they'd want more and more. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's straightforward. Migrant rights are human rights, and they should be respected wherever they go and be afforded the same protections as everybody else.
And what about the current family migration rules that seem to deny equal rights, full stop?
Yeah, I think family reunification is, the rules around that I think are particularly awful. I know many people who are being torn apart by that, and I think they should be allowed to be together. I think it's ridiculous that we keep couples, loved ones, apart from one another.
Sophie?
Coming from a country in which there was a lot of immigration, people moving out and moving in, there are 5 times more Scots living outside Scotland than in Scotland, that the migration rule, the family reunification is impacting very much on the white community as well as the migrant community. But going back to the equal right debate, I am a trustee for MRN. We're a right-based organization. We campaign for equal right. The government signed the convention for the UN Convention of Human Rights, and all the whole raft of human rights are there turning around and say that this does not matter. 1945 did not happen. And if you start to do that, we're going back to the year of the Second World War. But there's one other issue I want to put on the agenda, that it isn't, sometimes it's not always the employer that exploit migrants. The government has put in conditions and an environment that enable those employers to exploit those workers, right? So when you take away this whole thing about, inspecting for national minimum wage, inspection for health and safety, etc., and I'm not even sure whether the Gangmasters Authority is actually effective, and we don't have workplace inspection, then you create an environment in which exploitation becomes easier. I'm leaving today now.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I want to echo that. I mean, firstly, in terms of first comment, I don't think these ideas are progressive at all. We're supposed to be living in a democracy, which implies that people are equal and that people are able to participate. And if you start formally saying, well, some people shouldn't have the same rights as others, well, what kind of democracy is that? But secondly, I'd say there's a problem anyway, because we're already increasingly living in a society where people have graduated rights. And that's come about through the constant changes to immigration and nationality bills and through the rules that relate to them. And Sophie said that does lead to exploitation of those people that have got less rights. Why? Because they're more vulnerable. And the whole point about people having rights and enforceable rights is much about protecting the people that are most vulnerable in our society as everybody else. So if you end up in a situation where you say, well, it's a good idea for some people to have less rights, in my mind you're saying, well, it's fine for a whole load of people to be exploited in a way that we wouldn't allow other citizens to be exploited. And that cannot be right.
Stephanie? What do you think? What do you make of those answers?
The thing is, what worries me is that it's become respectable in certain areas of academia and public opinion makers to say that actually we have to be pragmatic, we have to be realistic. And I suppose I was really just wanting to know what people can raise from down the side of equal rights.
Who finds it acceptable?
Do you want me to give more names?
No. Didn't know the list was that long.
That's why I was bringing up David Goodhart and the IPPR think tank, and I can give other academics names who are now normalising the issue of perhaps in order to let Britain be a more open place, we should reduce certain social rights, economic rights.
Anyone else in the audience would like a... There's a lady at the back. I don't know where the microphone is. Apologies.
It's not here. Still trying to speak.
Hi, my name is Nisa, and I'm from an organization called EVES, which is a women's charity. I was surprised actually because I didn't think migrants have the same rights anyways. Most of migrants, which includes myself, who come to the UK, which are from non-EU countries, will have a sticker on our passport which says no recourse to public funds, for instance. Because of that reason, women who have been victims of domestic violence and other violence wouldn't be able to access refugee spaces in this country. We changed the law very recently around women who come as spouses who will be, if they are victims of domestic violence, then they can, in exceptional cases, access refugees and other services. So there isn't equal rights for migrants. And with the new immigration rule coming in, migrants are going to be checked intensively before even they rent a flat. They're going to pay for NHS. There are so many different things. Migrants don't have equal rights. We don't have the right to vote unless you're from a Commonwealth country. So I don't know where this equal rights issue is coming from even as a question. Migrants don't have equal rights.
Any other contributors? I can take one more. There's a lady here sitting behind the camera.
Hello, my name is Paulette Major, and I'm here for Right to Remain, the former National Coalition for Anti-Deportation campaign. I've just been recently granted refugee status, and I've been trying to fill some application forms for work. And there's this questionnaire that always comes up, and it's like, are you Black African, or whatsoever? And I was talking to friends, and they were saying that it's for my own good. I don't want to be favored, but I want to be treated equally. So I'm worried about the questionnaire. If it's for my good, it's going to play against me when I get a job.
Maybe you're worried about about ticking a box that tells.
Yeah, there's a questionnaire that comes out to ask whether you're African, whether your religion. I just want them to know if I'm a woman or I'm a man. And if it's a tough job for a British, it should be a tough job for me. And I don't think equality, as you said, Kiri, they shouldn't treat me softly or they shouldn't treat me hard. So why is the questionnaire there for?
I totally agree. Can I just ask, because like when we have to fill in a census form, there's a long thing you have to work out what bit you are and what bit you aren't. Is it the same, or is it just Black
It's quite
African?
a long questionnaire, and when I go to the bottom of the page,
EU citizen, or does it go into all of that?
Exactly, and your religion, and when you go down to the page, investor in people, equal opportunity. If it's equal, it should be equal. So why do they want to know exactly the color of my skin or whatsoever? I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not ridiculous actually. It's
it
an equality monitoring form. And why equality monitoring forms are there? Because trade unions have argued for this for a long time and continue to. Because this country is not equal. That if you're a woman, you're discriminated against. If you're a black person, you're discriminated against in the workplace, in getting into the workplace. And the only way we can demonstrate that is by actually having information. Because actually, if you don't have information, everybody says, oh, it's just those people with a chip on their shoulder. If you don't have information which shows whether the policies which the employers say they have, if they say on the bottom they're an equal opportunities employer, what does that mean if that means that they're just employing 2 or 3 people? Many employers will say to me there are diverse work, they've got, they're up for diversity. And I say, yeah, you've got a diverse workforce, yeah? All the people of colour are at the bottom of it. So in terms of your diversity policies, what exactly progress are you making? So it's important, those questionnaires are important. I can understand your reservation, but those questionnaires are important if we're going to actually put pressure on employees and government institutions and other institutions to actually live up to the rhetoric that they are constantly going on about in terms of equality.
Thank you. Can I move on to the next question, please? please, because I'd like to include as many questions as possible. And it was mentioned by the lady in the audience at the back about forthcoming legislation. Anne Stoltenberg. Where's Anne? Over there. Yes. You'll have to have the microphone because people won't be able to hear. Or I can repeat if you want.
My question was, I was concerned about seeing the recent rise in far-right and anti-migrant parties across Europe in the recent European elections, and I wanted to ask the panel's opinion. Do you think things will get worse before they get better? Which is obviously difficult to predict, but also in particular I'm curious to know, what do each of us do to work for a more cohesive society that's not dominated by far-right views?
Do you also include in that question the impact of the forthcoming new legislation on immigration?
Yeah, well, I had a separate question about that, what is going to be the impact of the new immigration bill, and I am concerned in that sense also about what the role that might have on cohesion in society and how it will make people mistrust each other on many different levels. But what I'm particularly interested in, I think, is also what can we do about it? What can each of us do, whether you're a migrant, whether you're a long-term migrant, third generation here, whether you're British, English, I just want to know, what do we do about this if we want a different kind of society?
Kiri.
What was the first part of the legislation?
The first part was whether you think things will get worse because of the rise of UKIP, the general rise across Europe of the far right thinking, influence and groups, and whether and on folded into that as to whether or not, if things are getting worse, what impact new immigration legislation will also have on that situation and community cohesion. I think that's what the lady...
In terms of whether I think it would get worse, as you said, it is hard to predict, but I think as long as we continue to have this stunted so-called debate, I think it will, because people see immigration as emblematic of everything that's wrong. It kind of goes back to what we talked about in the very, very beginning about whether it's just an economic question. It's about change, it's about globalization, it's about pressure on services, and as long as a lot of politicians put the blame for that at the door of migrants, I think that not only will it mean that we don't have an honest discussion about what we can do to fix those things, but I think that we will continue to see the rise of xenophobia and racism. And I think it does have an impact on community cohesion. This climate of suspicion, as one of the previous commenters mentioned, audience members at the very back there, the young lady, mentioned about the immigration bill, things like the checks before you can rent a flat in private accommodation, paying for the NHS, all these sorts of things mean that and it's not just for migrants, but for anyone who looks different or might be considered foreign, every contact they have with services, with different aspects of society will be regulated by how it others people from the very, very beginning. And it means that neighbours are looking at neighbours and wondering, I wonder about their status. Can I rent this flat to them? Oh, I don't understand the immigration legislation. It's just too complicated. The Guardian already uncovered prejudice in the private housing market against Afro-Caribbean applicants. I think that's just going to get worse because people are going to think, well, it's so complicated to navigate the immigration legislation. I'm just not going to do it. And we know it's already happening. I think it's going to get worse. As for what we can do about it, I think it's about, on a one-to-one basis, it's about having the conversation. I think, and this, it's a bit like, I guess, how you challenge, for instance, sexism in your everyday conversations. I think the lived experience of migration is different to what we're told in the media. And I think the more we interact with people and challenge assumptions, have those difficult conversations, don't shy away from them. I think that's important. But I also think solidarity, campaigning together and going back to what Sophie said earlier about people taking up for each other. So it's much more powerful if you're taking up for a group that isn't your own, and especially the people who are less empowered, like, well, not less empowered, but have less of a voice, like, for instance, the refugee community, who it's even harder for them to get heard. Like, taking up for all of that and standing together and saying, this is not the society that we want. This is not who we are. This is my neighbor, this is my lover, this is my friend. Our lives intersect, and we won't let politicians come and rent that apart.
Sophie.
I think this is a very challenging one, because one of the implications of the immigration bill is about accessing health care. We would have a situation in which healthcare workers who work for the NHS are not able to access health care at all. Think of the public health issue in which that happened. I mean, I was told the other day that when I come to my GP, I would have to bring my passport. That is ridiculous. And it is based very much on the color, on my features, and I'm a pain in the butt.
Is that before you get treated, you mean?
That before you get treated.
In order to get treated?
Yes. No, that's to just go and see a GP. I mean, I'm not going to say anything about receptionists. I have my own perception of what they're like and what their training entails. But being a healthcare worker, let's don't go down that avenue. But I think that this is going to be very problematic. We're going to have people who are afraid of accessing healthcare, and if they access healthcare, they won't get it. That means we are, creating not only inequality, we're creating a health issue in this country that go beyond what's happening. The second thing is that though you ask us what we can do to fight the far right, go and vote. How many people didn't vote in the European election? Look at each other, go and vote. Talk to your MP, talk to them. I don't care who you talk to, but talk to everybody, because we're the silent minority. We're not going out there and telling them that we don't like their policy. And if they don't do it, we will not vote for them. Join a migrant-led organization, join a campaigning organization, and be active. Don't be a passive recipient of this. Get your friends, get your neighbor. I don't care you get your church, but do something.
I worry about the rise of UKIP and about the rise of the right-wing parties in Europe, and I think this is a direct result of our government simply having no control over our immigration, so that we simply don't know, and I think this makes people anxious and angry. We simply don't know the numbers that are coming in. I mean, just to give one very small example, in North Brent, in the schools in North Brent, in 2008, there were 96 Romanian children in the schools. Today, there's over 1,000. Nobody knows how many there are going to be next year or in 5 years' time. There may be half that number. There may be double that number. The point is, nobody knows.
Why do numbers matter so much then?
I think numbers are crucial. I don't think this is, for me, this is not about race. It's not about the people coming in. It's about numbers. If everybody suddenly started having 10 children in this country, I would be equally furious and jumping up and down and screaming. It is entirely about numbers, and it's about not being able to say how many numbers are going to be in this country. So you can't plan services. You cause unease amongst people because they don't know how many people are going to be living here. We don't know how many houses we need to build. We don't know, and we're seeing in London at the moment, how many more maternity services we need, how many more schools we need. We can't plan. I mean, what we need is a government who says, okay, we think we should be bringing in 100,000 a year, what the Conservatives say. Labour may say something else. We want to bring in, well, under Labour we had 4 million people come in. And so that the electorate, who are made up of migrants, can go and vote. And we know what the governments are offering, and we can vote. But at the moment, it's a sort of uneasy situation.
So if the government were to issue month by month the number of people removed, and that went up, would that have any effect on
No, because they can't control how many people are coming in. It's a ridiculous situation for a government to
I
be
will
in.
I will come to the audience. Just if you pause a minute, we'll. Yeah,
It doesn't.
Madam.
I've been to them.
Anyway.
They don't control it at all. They have no idea.
I mean,
hang on. Look, I have to allow the members of the panel who very kindly given up some of their afternoon to come here to have at least answer, and I will come to all of you, I promise, after each member of the panel has had their say. Will.
I mean, I've got to say this debate about numbers is something that I just don't understand. It doesn't relate at all to the points that you were making about planning for hospitals and schools and all the rest of it. Because what the government has been doing over the last 4 years is reducing the number of hospitals and bloody schools by making public services cuts. Irrespective of whether migrants were here or not, the pressure on public services will be increasing. That's why those issues are not an issue about migration. That's why I said they were a proxy issue. But I'll come to it. So, I mean, I really do not understand this business about, if we can control the numbers, this will mean everything will be better with services and jobs, because it's just not true. Secondly, the question about, in terms of Europe, what's going on in Europe is frightening. And it's been going on a long time. It's just that we're little islanders here, and we don't take any notice what's going on across the other side of the channel, and what's been going on across the other side of the channel in terms of right-wing populism for the last 20 years, which has been increasing. And we've just been lucky here, up until now, in some ways, that we haven't been exposed to the kinds of situations where, quite frankly, in places like Austria and Italy, fascists have been part of the government, the very people that people were fighting against in the Second World War. That kind of right-wing authoritarianism and populism has grown across Europe, and it is frightening. And we need to sit up and take notice, because actually we're not immune from it. Sophie made the point about people needing to go out and vote. People need to take more of an interest in politics. It's a very strange thing at the time to say when people seem to be taking a less of an interest in politics because they believe politicians can't deliver for them. But actually, if you don't take interest in politics, you leave it to the politicians. Finally, I just wanted to say on the new Immigration Act, which I think is really insidious. When I was growing up, people used to talk about, those horrible people behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany, the government gets people to spy on their neighbours, right? And what are we doing now? What we're doing is creating internal borders through this kinds of legislation, which is turning our public servants into immigration officers, quite frankly, and other people in society into immigration officers. And the comment that was made that people, this is the effect of this isn't going to be have any kind of effect on whether there are more or less undocumented migrants in this country. The effect will be that people will start profiling each other. Are they, by the way they look, by the colour of the skin, by how they sound. And I've had that experience, going into Brussels in the morning, getting to Seven Sisters tube station, and somebody, just because I'm black, from the Home Office, wanted to talk to me about whether or not I'm entitled to be in this country, presumably travelling on the tube at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, I take great exception to that, actually. And I know a lot more of that's going to happen. It's going to happen in relation to whether I get medical care, whether I go and rent a house. All kinds of people are now going to be asking me, somebody who was born in this country, whether or not I'm British and I'm entitled to the services that I pay taxes for. And I think that's completely outrageous. And the point that somebody made about that we need to start campaigning, we're all campaigners in this room, but we're all leaders. We need to get our friends, our families, and anybody else that we can speaking up against this issue.
Thank you.
Because otherwise, if we don't, we're just accepting the status quo as it is.
Thank you, Will. Philip.
Well, I thought Harriet's argument was deeply illogical. I mean, on the one hand, she expresses worry at the fact that UKIP is more popular presumably the concern is because UKIP scapegoats migrants, and then she scapegoats migrants for the rise in popularity for UKIP. And then she changes the argument and says, actually, it's really because the government can't plan services. And so if that's the problem, then it's nothing to do with migrants at all. This is just the version of your first argument, where you're pretending to be pro-migrant, but then actually criticising migrants for things that have nothing to do with them at all. And then you... And then you come up with this crazy idea that somehow the UK Border Agency doesn't control borders. Of course...
They don't.
Well,
sorry, have you been to the...
Harriet, let him finish.
Well, he is attacking me. I think I have a right to reply.
You have a right, and I will allow you that right, but let him finish.
It is a complete and utter nonsense. Of course, the UK Border Agency controls borders. Actually, visa restrictions have got much tougher. Border controls have got much tougher. Deportations are higher. Yes, of course, borders are leaky, but the notion that we have open borders in this country is just a far-right myth. In terms of the rise of the far right around Europe, and I include UKIP in that, I think it is very worrying. At the same time, I think the biggest worry is not the rise of the far right, it's how mainstream politicians respond to it. And the problem is, and you see this in Britain, is that you have both the Labour Party and the Conservatives who are echoing UKIP's line. Labour thinks these are working class voters who should be voting for us. The Conservatives think these are social conservative nationalists who should be voting for us. And so they both end up chasing the UKIP vote. And very soon you end up in this position where migrants are scapegoated and demonised, and where there is nobody putting across a pro-migration argument. And I think that is very, very worrying indeed. And once you reach that tipping point, it's very hard to get back from it.
Let me allow Harriet the right to reply.
Yes, first of all, when I did my report on immigration, I spent quite a lot of time at our ports and airports and Eurostar, and I actually went with the immigration officers and saw that we have more or less an open border. And our politicians know this, which is why the problem that you were describing so well is happening, is why they're asking people inside this country to start behaving like immigration officers. That is the reason. I mean, there's so many examples I can give they can't stop. I mean, if you're arriving from an EU country, you just simply walk through. At Stansted, for example, and the immigration officers are not going to stop and look at everyone's passport. And it is very, very easy.
I mean, everyone's passport gets checked at Stansted. When's the last time you flew through Stansted? That's complete nonsense. Everyone's passport gets scanned, and they check whether you have a visa to be in here. I mean, this is nonsense.
In an EU country,
excuse me, let her finish.
Come on. In an EU country, it is extremely easy to get an
We're not part of Schengen. That's not true.
Thank you.
You can actually buy one in Paris for £10, a fake one, and a lot of French people get fake ones because it's easier than actually getting your actual identity document. Italian identity documents are even easier to fake. So it is extremely easy for the...
So fundamentally, your argument is that the border force, as we have it, is pretty much not very useless.
Yes, that's what the immigration officers told me themselves. This is what the immigration officers told me themselves. And that is why we're in the situation that you described.
Immigration officers.
Could I also just say one more thing about getting medical treatment, which is that I have lived in many countries, and England is the only country where I've not... Every other country I've lived in, you've had to prove that you are entitled to that treatment or that you have the means to pay before you're allowed in the hospital.
Okay. Can I take opinions from the audience? There was, I think, a lady. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I've seen all these. You can't see them, but I can see lots of hands up. Would you like to say something? Because I rudely interrupted before, and I apologise.
Yeah, I just wondered if you have heard this in the case BA because.
Hang on.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. My name is Pinar, and I'm coming from Glasgow. And I was just wondering if you heard of the Home Office and how harshly they treat the people.
I've
And there
been to
is...
Luna House.
Yeah, sorry, now it's my turn to speak as well. Thank you. And they do... They do treat the people really harshly, and people can't just walk in and come to this country. I've been an asylum seeker, and I've been in a detention center for 2 months. Why? Just wanting to be, just wanting a freedom, and just wanting the right to be living in another country without the fear of dying. And is this seem to be a criminal? Have I done anything wrong? No. And did I just walk in and just come to this country? No, I've been through a lot as well. And there are so many people in this country who's been through a lot and still in detention centers, who are still trying to get out. For what? Just for hope. And just for that reason, I want you to know that, and everyone else as well, that there is restriction in this country, and there are people being treated unfairly. And I do not agree with the thing that you said, that numbers matter, because it does not for me.
Thank you. There are a number who've got their hands up. There's a chap at the back, right at the back, by the pillar, or the white pillar. Yes. Wait a minute, sir. Can you wait till the microphone comes? Because some people won't be able to hear you.
Hi, my name is Paul, and I'm an activist with the Romanian community. And I want to ask, what's the matter with Romanian children? Why not German or French invading Britain? Why Romanian children invading Britain?
Sorry, why? My apologies. Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I quite got it. Sorry.
Why is there a particular problem with Romanian children invading Britain and not French or German?
I'll park that question and I will go to the panel, but I'd like to take some more from the audience. There's a gentleman at the back with his hand up.
Good afternoon. My name is Alhaji Aliou Fati from the Gambia. I am the chairman of the Liverpool Asylum Seekers and Refugee Association. My question is for that lady there. I mean, she's been saying about numbers. I just want to remind her, during the European Intertribal War, which is from 1939 to 1945, the village that my grandfather come from in Africa, only that village, they have recruited 40 British soldiers to come and defend Britain from Nazi occupation in 1939 to 1945. And that village was, about population of just only 130 people. In those days, numbers doesn't matter. But today, should numbers matter today? Because during 1939 to 1945, when Britain need help from other people, other immigrants, they go there and get them. Today, when immigrants also need Britain for help, I don't think numbers should be a problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Tumicha Mishaka from Glasgow Migrant Voice Network. I just want to add my voice to my brother. And I want to ask the panel, if all British citizens resident across the world were treated the same way the British treat immigrants, how would you feel? That's the question. Number two is that Britain went all over the world and colonized those countries. We have a problem because it's a historical ideology. The question of numbers, in my view, should be discussed in relation to the numbers of British residents who are in Spain, in Australia, in wherever the world. And we need to be mindful of that debate. The question also I want to put to the representative of the trade union is whether or not it's possible to have, even if it's 1 day a year, for all migrant workers across the country to down their tools, and we see if the so-called, I'm a British citizen, by the way, but if I chose to down my tool on the basis of the stereotypes attached to me as a migrant, how would we survive? Would the NHS function? Would the underground function? Would our offices be clean? Would the elderly people be looked after? I want you to think about that. Thank you.
two more. They may be questions or they just may be opinions, and then I will pass back to the panel for their final answers because we're running out of time and you must be getting hungry or thirsty or both. The lady at the back. That's you. Sorry. Can she have the microphone, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zenzile. I'm from Zimbabwe. I've been in the Neurological Center for the past 7 years, and now I'm out of work. I would just like to point out to my brother that, yes, we are lucky we are in Britain, but we don't get the accommodation you are talking of. I've been a destitute for the past 4 years, and I've lived under a charity called Hope. The government is not helping at all. So if you think the Syrians are going to get help, we are just going to be in the same log as we are. No accommodation from the Home Office, nothing from the government. So no benefits, nothing, but we are willing to work. At the moment, the NHS is crying foul, and I'm sitting here doing nothing. And many in the detention centers have got skills which they can give back to the community. Thank you very much.
This gentleman here.
Thank you very much. My name is Isan. I'm an Afghan PhD student, but at the same time a refugee. My question is to the panelist members, so any of them could reflect on it. First of all, there is a difference between refugee and migrant, which we should not confuse. Yeah. And when things come to the rights, the treatment, it's going to be different with respect to a migrant as compared to a refugee. And one of those important issues is basically the unemployment. And unemployment is concerned based on statistics. I think it's like 6 to 8 times. Refugees are less employed as the other citizens, and I don't know about the difference between the migrants, so it could be even less than that. So I would like to hear the views, whether it's basically the employers who do not care, or is it basically they do not know about the rights of a refugee because they are not offering them jobs, or is it basically the legislation, the law, which has got shortcoming or not enough protection for the refugees to be hired easily, or there is any other social or whatever issue that you call it?
So you're arguing, your statement is basically about the equality of rights here, isn't it?
That's very true.
Okay. Can you hand the microphone to the gentleman in front? Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Shreya. I'm from National Union of Students, and it feels wonderful to see all the migrant brothers and sisters here and all the allies here. Thank you. One thing I wanted to ask the panel, I came here from Nepal in 2010 to study, and I have an uncle here who is working in a human rights organization. He said before 2008, before the economic crisis hit the country, there were loads and loads of jobs. People didn't really have problems with migrants as such. Maybe he was a bit exaggerating, but you know that was the general picture. And after economic crisis hit the country, 2008, and the subsequent European crisis after that, perhaps you know, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the rhetoric is really going up. So I think,
your question?
Sorry, the question is, are we just scratching the surface when you just talk about migration only? I think migration issues must be, this is my opinion, but I'm also asking, must be tied up with the economic crisis. So whether economic crisis and migration issues tie up or not, and are we just scratching the surface now? Thank you.
I think we've come full circle. Shall I? Yes, I'll take one more question. There's a lady in the front table who has.
Thank you. I was really struck by what you said about, you know, and I always get quite struck by this sense of almost kind of positive nationalism when we talk about what we want Britain to be. We want Britain to be a fair society. Harriet, what you were saying about treating those who are here fairly, because that's what we're standing for. How can we get control of numbers and not completely undermine everything Britain is meant to stand for with practices like indefinite immigration detention and the kind of everyday bureaucratic barriers that are being implemented now? Because I don't think there'll be any of Britain as we know and apparently love it left once we've introduced these draconian measures to control numbers, if that's even possible?
Shall we start with that question then, Harriet?
Well, if you're talking about controlling numbers from outside, I'm not talking about internal borders, because I think that we all agree that that's just would give rise to all kinds of things that none of us would really like. You're talking about external, are you? External borders. No, I wouldn't defend detention centres. I just think we should get control of our borders. I don't know. I mean, I looked at this subject for a lot of time, and I think it's incredibly difficult.
We only have a couple more minutes left.
But shall we not divert onto that? I mean, that's a whole other subject.
I think the question was really about what picture does immigration control or increasing immigration control paint for Britain in the future, and what country are we going to live in where immigration control becomes the priority, the main thing that people think about, talk about, and act on because of the numbers game. I think that's what you were trying to, what you said, really. I think that's what she was asking. Look, there are a number of questions to get through. Can I go to Philip and ask you, what about all the Brits who've settled abroad, and how is there? Should there be a comparison with us exporting Britain and then only controlling those who want to come, who return or come back or want to enter the country because we have promoted Britain so well abroad and sent so many Britons abroad?
Well, I think there's a very clear difference between going abroad and conquering a country and coming here to contribute to society. So I don't think one can make a comparison between what Britons did in the previous centuries. In terms of now, I think there's a kind of cognitive dissonance in the sense I was on a BBC London programme which was interviewing Brits who had left London to move to Cyprus because they felt there were too many immigrants in London. And they were going, you know, it's terrible, you know, they don't speak the language, they make no effort to fit in. And they were here in Cyprus and, you know, they were reading The Sun, eating fish and chips, only spoke to other English people. And when it was pointed out to them, you know, even then, it just didn't click. And basically, it was because they thought themselves as good people, and therefore what they did was fine and okay. And the people coming to London who they thought of as bad people, and therefore when they were doing the same thing, it wasn't okay. And that is basically what this comes down to. In terms of the gentleman who said, why should we have a problem with Romanian children rather than other children, we shouldn't. I mean, Nigel Farage was clearly racist in implying that if you're Romanian, you're somehow likely to be a criminal, and therefore one should have an objection to having Romanian children around rather than German ones.
Thank you. Wilf, the day of action on behalf of migrant workers, would you have to ballot?
Well, you would actually, and that would be a nightmare. I mean, I'm not against the idea. It happened in Paris a few years ago. It was extremely effective. But it's part of the challenge that the trade union movement has in terms of organising and recruiting migrant workers.
Well, are you really representing migrant workers at all?
I would say there's a problem because we aren't organised in many of the areas that migrant workers work in.
Why not?
In the low paying service sectors of the economy. And
why
that's
not?
Partly because the economy and the nature of the world of work has changed drastically over the last 20, 30 years, but that's a challenge that, you know, we need to step up to the plate on that.
I mean, is it you've got a leadership in the unions that just simply is reluctant to grasp this nettle?
I don't think it's because people are reluctant. I think they're not really sure how, in many ways, to organise in areas, and it's not just with migrant workers, it's with other people. People who are now working on 0 hours contracts for agencies. It's a big change from the traditional workplace where people were working 9 to 5 and all had permanent contracts.
Sufi, do you agree with Wilf?
Yes, I hate to say it, I cannot disagree with Wilf. He's a very good friend of mine. And I'm hoping you'll buy me a drink after this, a double G&T. I think there is issue in terms of how migrants are recruited into the trade union. And there are issues not because of the migrant, because we have structures, and structures are institutions. And when we go back to what Stephen Lawrence inquiry have said, I should not go beyond that. But I think one of the interesting discussion in here was that, is there a historical perspective of that? I was born in the colony. I can say that because I'm old enough to remember being born in the colony. Britain used my country to produce and gave the raw material to the wealth of Britain. And that was what built this Great Britain. When you go overseas, it's called Great Britain. It's not just called UK, it's called Great Britain. And that is built on the back of migrants. Migrants that actually wasn't even British going out there, but Britain has actually imported people into those countries. The Southern Indians were brought into Malaysia to work in the oil palm plantation. The Chinese were brought in from southern China to work in the tin mines. And they were brought in, and migration was then forced into that. One of the very interesting things I thought what Philip was saying was that though, when you meet a British individual when you're out of this country, they're not called immigrant, they're called an expat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you say to them, look, sunshine, you're an immigrant, they look in horror. You know, this is the bad word. It's worse than the N word, I think, for them. But at the end of the day, an immigrant is a person living outside the country of their birth. Bottom line, the United Nations definition of what a migrant is. And at the end of the day, you know, I said on the EU, oh God, that was a long time ago, about the freedom of movement. If a British individual believed that they can go to Spain and buy a house and live there and not speak Spanish, not have paella, and just have fish and chips and beer and only speak English, they believe they have the right. They believe, that's the concept. They absolutely believe they have that right. But then if you come here and you need an interpreter, my golly, you are not integrating. So I absolutely agree with integration, but integration both ways.
Thank you. Kiri, the last word from the panel. I mean, we could come full circle about if the economy improves, will immigration be as toxic a subject as it is now? I think that was the question from our student delegate over there.
I think in some ways, if the economy improved, it would help. But I just think the way that the debate is going, the way every problem is framed in terms of immigration means that it will continue to be a salient issue. And just, I suppose my final word would be on the issue of control. It's not uncontrolled migration. As someone who's rubbed up against the system for 11 years, and I've known people who've rubbed up against the system for longer than that and at different points in history, there has never been uncontrolled immigration to this country. You may not like the numbers, but there has always been control, and it's expensive. I mean, I'm privileged enough to have been in work permit categories and so on, but you're looking at £1,000 a pop, virtually, every single time. You know, it's not cheap, it's not easy, and that's just if you're in certain categories. If you're, you know, other categories is even more difficult. And I just think we need to have a more balanced discussion about Brits going abroad and people coming here. It goes both ways, and I think that's probably my final word, is that it goes both ways.
Thank you very much. I think I ought to bring this to an end. I think we've probably gone over time, and I apologise if I've prevented people from getting to cups of coffee or tea or something. But I would like, and I'm sure you would, like to thank the panel, Sophie, Philip, Kiri, Harriet, and Will.